Well, that actually, I think is kind of a good segue into our next set of questions. Um, which again, to put the first two together, how do you feel your experience is different due to Witchblood, and what is something you thought was normal growing up and didn't realize was unusual until later? I think kind of like the idea of like there being a lot of weird stuff that people don't talk about sort of also fits into like you might have stuff that's weird that isn't as obviously weird because it's normal to you. Um, so anyone want to start on that one? Okay,
I have an
Sarah.
amusing story. So when I was about maybe 10 or 11, my family went to go, have dinner with like a sort of tangential family friend, like a colleague of my father's who had kids basically the same age as my brother and I, right? So after dinner, like the kids all went off to the girls' room to, play. And they had a Ouija board, which I didn't have one of at home because my father thought that was a stupid waste of money nonsense, right? But I was very excited. Like I'd see them on TV and I was like, all right. And we did that. And I thought the point of a Ouija board was to talk to dead people. So, but I also thought the instructions were stupid. Like, I'm not just going to talk to any dead person who shows up. I've seen movies. Like, I made us hold hands in a circle and like call it. I said some pretty words for the dead, and the thunder boomed and the light went out and the dead started speaking. And those girls flipped the fuck out, and we were not invited back to their house again. Like, like they screamed and the grown-ups came and my family left rapidly after that. And like, but I really mean it. Like I guess I thought when people used a Ouija board, everybody talked. Like the dead took that call and showed up on TV. Like that's what I had been led to believe in movies. Because like it goes the other way, right? We're taught magic isn't real, but there's this other circumstance where we're like taught that it is. Like I don't know. I thought Ouija boards were real. I just expected it to be real, and I learned. And you would think that from this incident I would have learned my lesson, but I did not. I have a whole string of those incidents over my childhood where I'm like discovering that I'm weird, which is partly like I didn't grow up in like a witch family, like a practicing family in the same way that Alex did, but I definitely grew up like like both of my parents are like were deep fucking weirdos. Like my mother did not appreciate the word witch being applied to her, but she didn't deny it either.
Yeah.
And so like I didn't know. Like again, my mother was like, God's talking to everybody. But my childhood is a painful process of discovering that that is not true.
I think that's also like kind of a good flip side thing of something that I guess I don't say in public a whole lot, but you guys have probably heard me say in private is the like if you're a witch, other people should probably know you're a witch, like not just magic people and not just people you've told. Um and that was like very much an experience growing up was
Oh yeah.
like once like I was like on a scout camping trip and we decided to do a skit where we were islanders and a photo of a guy washed up with a bunch of bananas and we decided he was the banana god and we were going to worship the banana god. And so I start pulling altar supplies out of my bag and my scout friends are like, this is normal, this is what we expect from BJ. Like the or like in high school when like I was like, okay, I'm going to be open about being into witchcraft and magic, everyone's like, everyone knows that, that's not news. Like um but yeah, in terms of like a weird moment for like understanding that something was unusual, I think I was at a party in college. And again, you guys might have heard this story before. I think I don't, I tell this one sort of routinely. And I was talking about my dad preparing me for school. And so, like, when I was little, we'd have dogs that would get loose in the neighborhood, and my sister was afraid. And so, my dad taught me to fascinate the dogs in order to be able to send them away to keep my sister safe. And then I was like 4 or 5 years old, something like that.
He did
And
not sister that, or
what?
just like why didn't your sister know how to do that?
No, I guess because she's littler than me. So she was,
Oh, okay.
if I was like 4, she was like a year old.
Oh god.
Um, so I think that was why it was taught to me. And Um, then when I started first grade, the night before my first day of first grade, my father sits me down and he's like, "So it's really important that you understand how to interact with your teacher because she needs to understand that you are the most important person in the class and that you are the one who needs her attention. So this is how you look at her and what you think in your head while you are looking at her in order to control her and command her to pay attention to you." And to me, that was just that's how you start school. Like that's like how school begins is you learn how to magically enthrall your teacher. And it wasn't until I was in college that I was talking with some friends and they're all just looking at me like I'm crazy. And I was like, did your parents not teach you to do that growing up? Was that not like a thing? They're like, no one's parents taught them to do that. That makes zero sense at all. And so I guess there were like probably a few other things like that that came up where it'd be like talking about stuff my parents taught me as a kid and then realizing like, oh, other kids were not taught this same thing. Um, but mostly kind of like hitting that young adult, like end of high school, beginning of college age where those conversations would come up. Um, and I think that's like in terms of like how it has been different for me otherwise. It's like there's a lot of things like Alex was talking before about having a teacher that comes from the same place as you and being able to be like, oh yeah, no, I know I did this the same way. I'll frequently have people like, well, how do you start with this? Like, how do you get past not believing in magic, having grown up in a world that teaches you magic isn't real? I was like, I never grew up in that world. Like it's like my magic was real in my household. Like the or like how do you develop this type of awareness? It's like, I don't know. That was just like a thing that you had as a kid growing up. I was like, I get that that's not what everyone has experienced, but I can't tell you how to do that. Like, or I can tell you like I've read these things about how to deal with those issues, but I haven't experienced that because I didn't come from that background where it was like, oh no, never believe in this, never do this. Um, and so that's like a difference that shows up routinely, like now as like a teacher and a writer, that there's things where it's just like, I'm just not going to be a good person to explain some of them. So I feel like Alex, you should have some really great stories as far as like running into things where like it highlighted to you that you were different. Like I kind of put this question in because I asked it in like the AMA and you didn't
Okay.
really give me like a real answer in the AMA, but I'm like, there's got to be a great
So,
Alex story of being
so
around
first of
normal
all,
people.
I'll preface it by saying, like, when you grow up with people who are teaching you that, you know it's weird. Or rather, you
Yeah.
know it's not the normal thing. So I don't have an answer of like things I didn't. I knew everything that was happening for me was not happening for most people. Like that was the thing. I never had the, oh wow, this is so, isn't everyone like this moment? I never did because I was told very directly no. And I'd also had the opportunity to meet other people who came from similar backgrounds, and we all were like, oh no, this there's us and there's them. And that was
Hmm.
that. It wasn't like a and even an antagonistic thing, but it was one of those like we shouldn't let people know this. Because that was actually the thing. Like the biggest difference, I guess, between you and me is when I was in high school, nobody knew I did this. I mean, I was a weird goth kid who played D&D and Vampire the Masquerade, still do. But you know, I mean, I didn't. You know, my father specifically was like, I don't want to deal with this being a known thing. I mean, the man's very firmly retired now. I don't think he gives a shit. I mean, he's privately very supportive of my career, so like I don't think he cares. But like, no, I mean, and I learned a lot of the same thing. Like, this is how you program the answers or the questions on a test you want your teacher to give you, right? The whole like, and I will actually tell the audience how this is done. So what you do is you get into a trance state, right? A proper alpha trance. You know, you can use binaural beats to help you even if that is what you like. And then you imagine the teacher in question, and then you put your consciousness inside of their chest, their like solar plexus center, and then you sink. You feel like you're in an elevator going down. And then when you hit bedrock, you spam the questions that you want again and again and again for like 10 minutes. And then lo and
And
behold,
a kid do that to me once, and I pulled all those questions off the test. I was like, "Fuck you, kid. Who do you
no,
think?"
honestly, if they know, I never had a teacher until I went to college because I went to Duquesne, which is a Catholic college. I did have a priest Psalm 51 my ass out in a sense. But then I honestly just did it again and it worked because I don't think he realized I could just do it again. But like there was that, there was a lot of, basically if I ever had a problem or an obstacle, I would solve it. But one of the biggest weird things from when I was a kid was I would dream about the inside of my neighbors' houses and I would know about the layouts of them and I would know which ones were unlocked. So in the summertime as a kid, when people were at work, I would just go into their houses and just stand there and be like, I was right, look at me. And like I would just be fucking around in people's houses. And I was only ever caught once. This woman, who by the way, I didn't know. She lived at the bottom of the hill. I lived at like the top of the hill. And then she comes in and she's like, who are you? And I went, I don't know how I can explain being here. Like I just said out loud, like there's no way I can explain being here. That's not going to sound weird. And so I left. Like, this little kid just like walked out the back. And I mean, I guess she didn't know that like I lived on the street or whatever because it never came up. It was never brought up and it was never weird. My parents never knew. But I did this with pretty much everyone on the street I grew up with. I would know if the back door was unlocked. I would know where the hidden key was. I would go into people's houses and just be there. And it was extremely thrilling to me at age like 10 or 11 to be able to be not just psychically places I shouldn't be, but physically able to confirm, like, yes, I was right, but also I am in this place. I am like an unbound creature who can stand in your living room when you're not there. And to anyone watching this, I may have been in your living room too. You don't know. I might be there right now.
You've definitely been in my living room.
I have, but you knew. But you knew. That was the difference. But no, but truly, like that was something that I did. That was a weird exploitation of these abilities. That was, I guess, essentially harmless at the end of the day. But like that was a thing, and I actually think that that gave me a lot of like personal confidence to achieve my dreams because nothing was barred to me as a child.
Yeah. Allison, did you have any kind of weird this is a thing where you realize like, oh, this is kind of different, or this is a thing that other people didn't do?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of stuff that I knew was different and that other people didn't do. But the thing that for the longest time I didn't realize other people couldn't do has to do with the way that I relate to my own body, and especially when I'm sick, how I can like go inside of myself and try to figure out what's going on and how to, I don't know, like change the settings so that I'm doing better. So it's something that I still do where, I can like put my consciousness like into a different part of my body and I can feel myself like breathing better as a result of it. Or I can uh, numb pain in a certain part of my body or things like that. So I was always like fixing my own problems, especially like if I were to get like a dislocated joint or something like that,
I
playing
learned that
sports.
from watching you when we were young.
Yeah, yeah. So, but it was for
I
like the longest time. I was like, isn't this just like a thing that everyone does? Turns out it's not.
Yeah, one of my nephews, I don't know how it came up, and it was when he was young, like elementary school age. Uh, Something came up about like psychic awareness and seeing things that were going to happen, or like hearing things that people weren't saying, or something like that. And um, he was just like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I have that all the time." And I was like, "Why'd you never mention that or bring that up?" He's like, "I just thought everyone had that all the time. I just thought that was part of life." And so to him, it wasn't something that was ever different or weird, which I think is also like, I guess, different in terms of how he and my other nephews and niece are growing up than versus how my sister and I grew up, where there was definitely for us stuff where it was like, okay, these are things that are going to be like different and weird, and this is okay to talk about like in the family. And then these are things like even in the family, don't talk about them, uh, like because we don't like that. Uh, but it was like there was an awareness that some of this stuff was different. So like I should probably also clarify that like I wasn't stupid as a kid. I didn't know that like I was a little unusual or that there were things that were different. But like there were some things where it was just like I guess I didn't associate them with being different. Um the but yeah, no, there was definitely an element of like, yeah, no, don't go talk about seeing spirits. Don't go like talk about how you're familiar with these things that you haven't seen before, but you've seen it in your head. But like talking about them in the house amongst the family was okay. And I guess my sister, because she's not as like tied into all that stuff, even though like when she started having kids, she was like, yeah, I wonder if the kids will be like that, if they'll have like these things about them. Uh, it's just not a thing where she ever interacted with them or talked to them about that way. And like my mom doesn't like it, and so like she probably also like has tried to tamp it down in the kids a little bit. Like my niece was very witchy as a child. Like she wanted us to conjure ghosts to haunt our house, so we live in a haunted house all year round. And was sad her first Halloween that we didn't go into other people's houses to see the ghosts of their families that would obviously be there those nights. And my mother has like made a very concerted effort to be like, no, don't be that weird kid. Don't be into those things. Like, because she doesn't like having those experiences herself. Like, she's asked me before how to get rid of it, and which is Alex, you and I have talked about as well. So then our last kind of cluster of questions for this grouping. Um, do all people who are born with witch blood actively practice magic? Is there a particular type of person who has witch blood, or are there specific social characteristics and leanings which connect with witch blood or witchcraft in general? I guess that works out again that like that last bit really kind of transitions into this question. Well,
I
but
don't know. I think I have the unpopular answer to this one. I don't think that there's anything that is guaranteed to be comorbid with witch blood. To use the guy who works at the dealership, you know what I mean? Like to use the drunk guy I talked about. There is no specific kind of person. I mean, again, it's like, a lot of people I talk to, even people who do have the gift, who will lament the fact that it's like, no, it isn't like Mage the Ascension, where the only cool witch-blooded people are like weird eccentric artists who all look and act like me. It's like no, no. Like for example, I've mentioned this to people before. I know a guy lives in deep Appalachia, dumbest fucking guy I know, like borderline needs like help living, can possess and control dogs. Like every dog every time. Like and because he was taught how and he practiced. He's a remarkably terrible mechanic as a job. Like it's there's no there's nothing that attaches to this but itself. Now that said, the ones you hear about who like there's a certain personality that will be like drawn to magic, for example, or drawn to certain kinds of magic. Your internal power system tantric practitioner is going to be a little different than your Obeah man, going to be a little different than your tradcraft person, going to be a little different than your grimoire hound. And there are some people who do a bunch of these things. But I would argue that certain strains of witch blood could be more apt to be attracted to certain other things, like certain kinds of magic, for example. Certain like hopefully you find the kind that resonates with you. I imagine it'd be kind of tragic if you had the gift and your only teachers are people who taught you the magic that you just fucking hate. That you just can't pull off. That would be a weird cosmic irony in that way. But yeah, I mean, I think that the statistical majority of witch blooded people are people who believe in manifestation who make it work. I think that is your statistical majority of people who are at least are cognizant of it. But again, sports science will talk about how active visualization is really helpful, but for some people it's bafflingly helpful. I would say that's a thing. I would say some people who have physical strangeness about them in some ways, either remarkably short or acromegaly level tall. I would argue that Andre the Giant was witch-blooded, for example. Robert Wadlow, the tallest man who ever lived, was also remarkably prone to dreaming true. So I think that there are things that can combine. But like I said, there's also just the dickhead who works at the dealership who can sell you anything. and there's the spark in there, and you couldn't even tell that person what they have, and they would not believe you. You couldn't. I would actually argue that a lot of megachurch pastors have this. In fact, I was talking to a tantric practitioner friend of mine who was talking about, and I forget the name of the city of like controlling groups of people. But they're like, oh yeah, every president has had this, and one could not make the argument that they haven't. And every megachurch pastor has this, and it's an inborn gift. It's a special gift. And I think an actually good astrologer, of which there may be four living, would be able to like show you on the doll in the chart where God poked you and made you special that way. But truly, I think that there's that thing, and I think that actually runs entirely contrary to the whole like, you just want to be special. It's like, no, lots of people have this. It's kind of like, how many people do you know who are really tall? Everybody? No, but does everybody know a really tall motherfucker? Sure. It's everyone knows a witch-blooded motherfucker, and his name is Thaddeus, and you hate him. But yeah, that's my disappointing answer on that one.
So like not to try to dig into the whole question, but I think your your point about oh geez, now it's just escaped me. Oh, about pastors, yeah. I had a partner whose mother was a pastor, and both of them had this weird charisma where they could lure people in, make people really kind of obsessed with them, make people do things that they wanted, make people listen to them, and they were just strangely lucky. Like
Yeah.
everything would fall into place. Like this person went to another country without speaking the language and having no place to stay and managed to have like a series of events fall into place to create this huge adventure that was exactly what they had planned and wanted, where they had like a free place to stay, got the job they wanted to get, got transport to the next country they wanted to go to, and got lined up with the really weird job that they wanted to get there, all without speaking the language of either place that they were going to. Um, and like both them and their mother had things like this all the time. And I was like, you don't feel the same as what I'm used to for like witch-blooded people. Like, but I think that also goes into like how there can be different flavors and different types of it. But they had exactly kind of like what you're talking about, that is that weird luck, that weird charisma, the weird ability to sell you on anything, and kind of like how um some of the side effects of Mercury work that Allison has talked about with the PGM, like that was what their life was, just naturally as who they were. Um, and but yeah, totally a pastor, like that was their experience.
Yeah, but a lot of them will actually kind of tell themselves when you ask them like, "Hey, how do you get over stage fright?" And they're like, "Oh, I just know that I shine, like I just feel the light of God coming through me." No. Or like you ask a really good salesperson, like, because there was this seminar I went to in college. It was one of the free things, and it was like it was titled "Everything Boils Down to Sales." And as soon as I got in, I saw the guy there, and I saw essentially two different men in one. There was this smarmy Cassius hath a lean and hungry look motherfucker up there, and then there was this like the most trustworthy man I'd ever seen, and it was like I could almost see him in one in each eye, and I was like, oh. And I thought to myself, like, this person is actively doing magic, so I was much younger and much more naive. No, because I know this for a fact, because the whole seminar he talked about all these like mental tricks you can play on yourself to be a better salesperson, including, well, fellas, because it was all guys in this. He's like, fellas, and he put his arms on his hips and he went, sometimes if you really want to convince someone of something, you picture a bubble. Now hear me out now. You picture a bubble around yourself, and then you wrap the other person in that bubble, but it's your bubble. So everyone's in. I'm like, Jesus Christ. So I walk up to him afterwards and I was like, who'd you study with? He's like, oh, I learned sales. I'm like, no, 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 no. What magic did you learn? And he goes, I'm sorry. And I'm like, no, 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 no. And he looked at me and he went, you're unwell. You need to seek help. And he was being completely serious. Like this man had no idea what he was doing. He just knew how to do it. But like that's the thing. But when he said that, I was like, holy shit! Like all the stuff that like a lot of the Atkinson like psychic development program stuff, all the evil things tell you not to do. A lot of witch-blooded people just do. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like whatever you do, don't create a psychic bridge between yourself and a person's head or their heart or their genitals so that you can make them do stuff. And a lot of witches will be like, so I was on a date, right?
Yeah. I would say that's just like the like mother's milk. That's like the first thing that you like understand or learn to do as like
But
a
I would
kid.
also argue that back
Like,
to the witch blood thing, so much of it is reflexively intuitive. It is having better psychic reflexes against a world and being able to perceive. It's one of the reasons why, like I said, I find really charming about like Taoist training, as I understand it, is their first focus is on clairsentience, and their primary focus never ceases to be on feeling things. It's why whenever they work with different forces, they'll be like, "Are you good at visualizing? No, okay, fuck it, don't bother with it. Are you good at feeling stuff in your body? Yep, cool. Okay, here is a list of every letter and every Chinese character, and here is a sensation associated with it. Master these and move them like you move the basic stuff with qigong, and then you can learn 100 different energies. And of course, those who are naturally, I would argue, the most clairsentient are deeply witch-blooded. I would also say that as a point of interesting note, the people I have seen in my life who are like psychic blanks, to use the Warhammer term, psychic nulls, they have a weakened sense of touch and a weakened sense of smell, typically. Um, but most specifically, the weakened sense of touch is interesting because in a lot of tantric theory, your sense of touch is psychic purely. They're like, yeah, fuck your nervous system. It's actually just psychism that allows you to have physical sensation. I don't believe this is medically true, obviously, but there's something to it. Like, can you feel, and they'll do these trainings where they're like, can you feel the difference between the texture of this silk and this silk? Okay, you can? Cool. Then do this exercise. And a lot of it is this like tying it to the respiration, tying it to the heartbeat, tying it to live the sensation in the body. And they'll say that the most gifted and the most inhuman of souls have several hands to touch.
so anyone else have some answers or thoughts for those questions? Or
No,
should I go back and
Alex was said his opinion was going to be unpopular, but I agree with basically everything he said.
Oh, that's base.
Like, I think that the things that we think of as being associated with Witchblood, like in as much as there are things that unite all Witchblood people, I think they're really about like just being a weirdo, and being a weirdo produces certain like knowing you're a super weirdo, which I'm not saying like all witch-blooded people do, but my experience is even though ones who wouldn't like think of themselves as magical in any way, they do have this sense that they're like not fully normal, right? And I think that produces change. Like I think that impacts the way you interact with the world in ways that become clear. So like I would never say that like witch-blooded people are more open-minded, for example. But I do think there is a way in which like once you get used to being weird, you're like, oh, what else is everybody else wrong about?
I can see that.
Allison, you have any thoughts on those?
I mean, I feel like my local social circle has an extraordinarily high number of witch-blooded or whatever you want to call them people, largely because we could see that in each other, and we're like, hey, and then we kind of all banded together, and uh, almost none of them really dove into it like I did. They just kind of, if they consciously use it at all, they just use it to make their lives a little easier, make their jobs a little easier. So I'm not really seeing that there's um, like a certain proclivity towards, doing magic out of the people that have it. Especially with my family members, they were just regular folks with regular jobs. Um, not really pursuing that stuff, but maybe a little interested in folklore or things like that, like a curiosity to find out more.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah, I
think an
think
example. No, I'm sorry, BJ, go on.
I was gonna say on the in terms of the like, does everyone who has it use magic? Like again, I mentioned my mother. She like we can have conversations and I can be like, well, you're a witch, you're a seventh daughter of a seventh daughter. And she's like, well, yeah. And she will talk about like her gifts and her experiences. And she'll also talk about not liking them and not wanting them. But even as like a kid, I was still encouraged to use them and develop them because there's still a recognition that they were beneficial. Um, but she doesn't like the idea of actively doing magic because she's like a fundamentalist Christian and thinks that's bad. Um, and like looking at my family more broadly, like I didn't grow up around my mother's family and don't have a lot of experience of them, but like my great grandmother on my mother's side was allegedly a witch, and my mother chose not to introduce us when we were at an event together. But there's also like there's like a second cousin on my mother's family who is like a hoodoo drug gang person. And then there's like a bunch of other people in my mother's family who apparently do hoodoo to the point where my mom's like, no, none of them are Christians. They all do that voodoo stuff. And it was just something like, I guess that's there in the family, but I was kind of partially kept away from it. Um, my father's family, I know I definitely have like cousins and aunts and uncles and great aunts who have experimented with things like that and had various connections to things like that. But I don't think any of them have dove in as much as me. And there's definitely not that same consistency there. And like my sister didn't pick it up. She definitely has some things that she experienced growing up that were kind of her own uncanny things that are different than the ones that I inherited. But she's not actively choosing to be magical. So I think yeah, there's totally a ton of people who they have some element of this within themselves, and maybe it's enough to make them interested in checking something out or trying something, or they have some experiences, or it might just be that they have whatever it is that makes them weird, like they see the future, they see the dead, they hear things or feel things, but they don't actively engage with it and don't instrumentalize it into something that's actually usable. But I also generally agree with the rest of you that there's no set traits like I think it's wild that there are some authors that have laid out some really specific ones that seem to fly under the radar of people who have an issue with these ideas. Um, but yeah, no, I think it's really cool that like you can have completely normal seeming people who have these things that are weird about themselves, and you can have people who are really weird who have these things that are weird about themselves, and it can run the full range of types of people. Because I've never liked the idea that the magic community has to be like this one set social group that's one way, like because I don't fit that social group entirely myself. Sarah will frequently point out that I am not the bastion of normal that I like to think of myself as, that you can still tell that I'm weird as fuck, but I do quasi pass for normal more than a lot of people. And that was definitely a useful thing growing up, having my group of weirdo friends that I could be the normal one who could interface with normal people. Um, but but yeah, I'll acknowledge there is that layer underlying the normalness that is pretty visible still.
I mean, it's kind of funny because people I've seen in my life who have a lot of gifts, who have this special aspect to them, who live fairly normal lives. It's always in the smallest details, right? Like I think, for example, about you know a woman that I knew years ago who had three sets of twins because she willed it so, and who she was like, oh well, I knew this particularly older woman, World War II generation, who was like, I knew every time the man I was going to marry, who I had yet to meet, I knew exactly what he looked like. I knew where he fought in the war, and I protected him in my dreams. And but she never told him. She only told me because I could read the cards. And she was like, "That's real." But it was one of those things. She's like, "Oh, I've never thought that was real, but I can tell you all these things." And she just said, like, I never need to tell anybody else now because I've told one person, and I feel better. I feel unburdened. And then I'm sure she went on to live her life completely normally. But even I always think for example, about like my own father. The man looks like fucking Hank Hill. Like he is extremely normal. Second Amendment T-shirt, open carrying, a handgun, doing his thing. And I mean, I growing up witnessed him do all sorts of magic, and he certainly has the gift. But it's funny. But then you're like, okay, when were you born? Oh, Halloween, full moon, the only child in his generation with red hair for no reason. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of that, but he was just like, no, I'm just a guy. Just a guy, living my life, It's just I had the thing, but like you wouldn't know to look at him, and his personality can sometimes be so confrontational and unpleasant that you wouldn't want to talk to him for longer than 10 minutes if you didn't already like him. So like it's just a vibe where some people you almost will never know unless you know what to look for, and some people it's so bafflingly obvious. But I will say, and I always caution people with this kind of conversation because I've had it with some other people. Your most eccentric and fun friend probably isn't it either. Like, just because the person's weird and smart and cool doesn't mean that. Because, like, for example, I have a friend with whom we'll talk about like what celebrities we would think of were witch blooded, and I'm always the one to like to rain on the parade. Like, who do you think? I'm like fucking Danny DeVito. I think Danny DeVito is witch blooded because his career doesn't make sense, and anybody who knew him is like, no, it doesn't. Like people are like, oh, yo, well, David Bowie's witch blooded. I'm like, duh. Like that one's kind of a given because of the cultural significance, but also the fact that David Bowie is terrifying looking and it ended up being a sex symbol. But like also people be like, well, who? Like, okay, well, there's the obvious Tilda Swinton, the woman's ethereal and weird, but also like I don't think Grimes is. I don't think Elon Musk is. I don't think. And again, you look at Grimes, you're like, oh, it's an anime character in real life. Like, yeah, I would hang out with Grimes. Old Grimes more than current Grimes. First three albums were good, and afterwards we kind of fell off. But there's that. But you're like, okay, well, is Nick Cave witch blooded? Maybe. Is Tom Waits witch blooded? Probably. But like, where's the difference? How do you know for sure? And for me, it's again in the details. It's like, where did you come from? How uncanny was your success? And how much can you get away with? I think that's another less than polite thing to be discussed about Witchblood is like you can push boundaries, metaphysical, social, and even physical on your own case. That's again going back to Mike Tyson. His body metrics don't make sense. He should not have been able to do what he did, and yet he did. But like, the person who finally beat him wasn't Witch-blooded, was just a better fighter at the time. But like that's the thing. Like it's interesting to see again this nature. I think we're all to one degree or another guilty of it. Because if you have a gift and a talent and you're special, you're like, yeah, fuck yeah, I'm great. Like I love this about me. Because you should sing of yourself, to quote Walt Whitman, and you should feel good about who you are. But kind of like, who uses this? Think about it. I mean, have you ever seen a line cook sing opera? I have. Wouldn't expect it. Beautiful, heartbreakingly beautiful, you know. But you're like, where'd you learn that? Oh yeah, I sang growing up. No big deal. Or you go to like a local jam session, you see like a power line repair guy, particular guy I've jammed with several times. Amazing guitar player. You would never know because he doesn't like look the part necessarily, and he doesn't aspire to be in a band or be famous or whatever. But he has the gift. And he has the gift, musically speaking, in a big way, right? Like he'll know what you're about to play before you play it, which actually I think is half psychic, half just being good as fuck at improv. But like, there's a lot of this, and I wonder, and I don't think there's an answer to this, but I wonder, opining as I often do, how many people out there have some psychic or magical gifts, and don't they are the last ones to know more than just the is this normal, but like they hardly ever use it because maybe there's something in them that holds themselves back from like, oh, every time I get mad, something bad happens. So I'm a very nice person. And then 10, 20, 40 years goes by and they don't know why they're so calm and polite all the time.
Mm.
But they'll tell you, I feel as though I'm holding a storm in me or something like that. Well, because you perhaps are. And I bet you, specific individual that I'm thinking of, if you yelled real loud on the top of a hill, it would rain. That's all I got.
All right. Well, I think there's almost like a whole other topic to get into there with that kind of contained storm and sort of the antagonism and adversarial nature of the witch. But I think that's a maybe a whole bigger conversation than this one. But that puts us to our third group of questions.